Hey y'all, welcome back. So glad y'all joined me. Today we're going to be doing this skirt using our panel setting on our Sentro knitting machine. Very detailed, step by step. The skirt is stretchy. I'm going to help y'all with measurements, the whole nine. So let's get right into it. Okay y'all, so of course we're going to need our Sentro knitting machine. We're going to need some waist yarn. It could be whatever waist yarn you want, acrylic, cotton, whatever works best with your machine and whatever you're comfortable with. And then we're going to need our yarn. I'm using Karen Latte Cakes. I'm not sure the color, so I'm going to pop it up here on the right hand side of the screen so that y'all know. And I'm using two skeins because I'll be using one for the front panel and the other for the back panel so that the shades line up. So that way when it's transitioning colors, you know, it'll still be the same front and back. Hope that makes sense. I sometimes talk too much, but I think that makes sense. You're also going to need just scissors, a 4.0 hook for your for putting it together, and then your needle that came with their Sentro knitting machine. All right, I don't know what that term is called, but get y'all needle, y'all. Okay, so let's get started. Oh, and measuring tape. So are we getting started now? Voiceovers are so hard, y'all, but I think we're about to get started. Yes. But first things first, I want y'all to download a row counter app. I downloaded my row counter, and this is just going to help you keep track of your rows as you're knitting. All right, so first things first, you're going to want to go to My Projects. Then you're going to want to go to New Project. I'm just going to name this Long Skirt Pattern. And once I have that, you'll hit Next. And then you'll be able to keep track of your rows here. I'm going to set mine to 0 just so that we're like starting at 0. You can keep it at 1 if you want and won't have to add, but I'm starting mine at 0. Once you have that, we're going to grab our waist yarn. Okay, so I have my waist yarn and I'm going to be putting it directly under that first needle, that white needle, okay? And to cast on, I'm going to go behind the next needle and start to crank. Then I'm going to place the yarn in front, behind, in front, behind, in front, behind, in front. And I'm going to do this all the way until I get to 43. So you'll do this until you get to the number pin that you want to end at. Once you get there, I'm going to show you how to go back the next direction. Okay, so I'm at 43 and I'm finishing off behind. It doesn't matter if you're behind or in front of. You still want to make sure that your yarn is directly underneath this piece right next to the needle, okay? So I'm going to take and put my yarn directly under that piece, and then I'm going to just press that other piece down so that everything is straight and correct. And I'm going to place my yarn through the feeder now, all right? So I made sure it's underneath that piece. Placing my yarn in the tightest setting. And then I'm going to hold on to my yarn and start to crank in the opposite direction. So as you're turning, you want to make sure that you're holding on to your yarn, okay? And I'll show you once we get to the other side. So now we're back here at this needle, the white needle, and that will just count as 2 rows, all right? So now I'm going to hold on to my yarn, and since we're going in the opposite direction, I'm going to hold on to my yarn and crank in the opposite direction. And all this does is keep your ends straight. So you want your edges on both sides of your piece to be straight, okay? Making sure I'm going all the way over until I reach that piece and the yarn is going underneath. I'm going to hold my yarn and turn in the opposite direction. And that will be row 3, right? So you're going to do 15 to 16 rows, just depending on how you're counting, of waist yarn, making sure that you're keeping track of your rows using your app. And then I'm going to meet y'all at the end so I can show you how to cast on with our skirt yarn. All right, y'all, don't mind my row counter. It says 12, but this is, I think, about 16 rows of waist yarn, all right? And I ended up back at my white needle. And this is what it looks like. Yours might look similar or a little different. Regardless, doesn't matter, as long as you have those 15 to 16 rows, okay? So now let us cast on with our new yarn. But first, I have to show you how we're going to attach it. All right. I'm so sorry about this angle, y'all. It's not showing where I cut my yarn exactly. If you want to wait until you see the length of where I cut my waist yarn, then that's fine. But you're just going to keep your yarn in the feeder, in the tightest setting, and you're just going to cut it. Not too long, not too short, but just right. And I cut mine off camera. So sorry, I thought it was showing. And I'm going to show y'all how long mine actually was. So it's just right there, right? So once you cut it, you're going to pull it from out of the feeder, and then you're going to take it from underneath that needle, crank so that you're pulling it apart from that next one. And you see here, this is where the project actually starts. So making sure that yarn doesn't come off of that needle, we're just going to crank until we get that needle close to the feeder, okay? Close to the feeder. I hope that makes sense. It should though, all right? So once we have that needle, we're going to take your yarn. I'm taking my Karen Latte Cakes and I'm going to place it directly underneath that needle. And then I'm going to place it in the feeder and place it in the tightest setting. Now, it may not be directly underneath, but we just put it there to stage it before we start. All right, and then I'm going to start to crank. I'm going to stop and tie my waist yarn to my panel yarn, my Karen Latte Cakes yarn. I'm going to tie it twice so that it's secure and doesn't come undone. I actually got this tip from my girl. I'm going to link her channel here as well because she taught me how to do this. And now we're going to continue to crank all the way till we reach that 43, making sure we're going underneath that piece next to it, right? Holding our yarn and cranking back the opposite direction. And that would just be row 2, okay? I don't have my row counter here, but that would have been row 2, all right? We're back at the white needle, okay? And as you can see, even though the project starts at pin number 3, I still go all the way up into the white needle because it just keeps me organized and makes sure everything stays intact. So here we go. Yep, the next row will be row 3. And I'm going to continue to do this for 150 rows. I'm about 5'6", and I want it to be a little long. I don't know if 150 rows will be long enough, so I'm going to take my measuring tape and actually check before I keep going and show y'all how to measure the length of your project as well. All right, so go ahead and do as many rows as you feel like you need to before it's time to check with measuring tape. All right. Okay, so now I'm at about 151 rows, and now I'm going to show y'all how you can measure the length of your project while it's still on the machine. So I took my measuring tape. I'm going to start from underneath the waist yarn, and I'm going to stretch my measuring tape all the way out. I'm at about 34 inches. I think I can keep going. I want to probably get to about 36, 36.5 because I want this to come to my ankles, okay? So I'm going to do probably about 10 more rows, stop periodically and check with my measuring tape just to see where I'm at. And I will meet y'all once I get there. If you want to stop here, that's perfectly fine. Or if you're like me and you just want a few more rows, just make sure you're checking periodically with your measuring tape so that it yields the length that you're going for. So I'm going to do a few more rows and I'll come back and show y'all how many inches we're at after. All right. Okay, so I did about 162 rows. So now I'm going to take my measuring tape and let's just see where we are. So it looks like we're at about 36.5, maybe a little closer to 37, which is perfect. That's exactly where I want it. All right, now I'm going to show y'all how to cast off, and I'm also going to explain the difference between adding a waist yarn and not adding a waist yarn, because we added our waist yarn at the beginning, but to cast off, we're not going to add any waist yarn. All right. So really quick, when you add a waist yarn to your project, at the end of the project, you'll create a border. So you'll have more of a straight edge versus when you don't add any waist yarn, it'll just flow just exactly as it's supposed to. So it may kind of curl or it may kind of fall. This will be the end of the skirt, and that's how I want it to fall at my ankles. Okay. So waist yarn equals straight edge. No waist yarn, it kind of just naturally falls and flows the way it's supposed to. All right. So let's cast off. Okay, so now we're going to cut our yarn, but before we pull it out of the feeder, we're going to take the yarn and just bring it around the entire knitting machine, because this is how long we want our yarn to be when we cut it to cast off, okay? Then you're going to take the yarn out of the feeder. You're going to place it in the middle so that it doesn't get tangled. Then we're going to hold it and we're going to start to crank all the way around until we reach the end. Okay, so this will set all of our stitches and prepare us for casting off. Once you reach the end, you'll know you reached the end because your last needle will go all the way down, like shown. Once you reach the end, you're going to take your needle, place your yarn inside of the needle. And once you place that yarn inside of the needle, now we're going to pick up each one of these loops here on the needle and just pull the yarn through, okay? So I'm going to zoom in. We're going to pick up that loop and pull that yarn through. Make sure you're out being super careful, because if you skip one, it'll create those rips throughout your project, and we don't want that here. We just want a solid stitch the entire way around. So continue to go all the way around, placing your needle through each loop as shown, and you'll do this until you reach the very end, okay? Okay, let's do this all the way around. I'm going to forward so that it doesn't get repetitive and boring, and I will meet y'all at the end, okay? Okay, y'all, so I'm so sorry, but the angle got bad again. So just continue to pick up every single loop all the way until you reach the very last stitch. Once you reach the very last stitch, the whole entire panel will come off of the knitting machine, all right? Okay, so now this is what it'll look like. I'm just pulling my panel out of the machine and moving my machine to the side so I can show you how it will look. And this is what we have here. As you can see, like I said before, we have no waste yarn. So it just fell normally like how it would without it. And this is going to be the bottom of it, which I really love how that came together. So now we're going to close and fasten off. So to do that, I'm just going to be taking my yarn, putting it through my yarn needle. Now I'm just going to go to the end of my skirt, pull that yarn through the edge, and create a knot, okay? So I'll just pull the yarn through, and then I'm going to pull it through the center to create my first knot. Then I'm going to take and do that again in another stitch on the end, pulling my yarn through and just creating another knot, okay, for security. There's no right or wrong way to do this, y'all. It's just you doing it at the end, okay? Once you have that, you're going to take and cut your yarn long enough so that you can weave in that tail at the end, and grab your measuring tape so that you can measure out your first panel. Okay, now that I have my measuring tape, I'm just going to place it across my first panel, and I'm just going to stretch it, okay? So to stretch it, you'll just hold it at one end and pull from the other end. And that's how you'll figure out how long your first panel is, okay? So we're just going to stretch it. And I think mine stretches to about 23 inches. Okay, a little bit over, so 23.5, almost 24. Okay. Okay, so now that we have that, you are going to do your second panel. Depending on the size of your skirt, you may want to do more or less pins. So, for example, I did 43 pins for this panel. For my second panel, I did about 38, and that was just a guesstimate for the size that I was actually going for, okay? Because keep in mind, we are going to be attaching both panels together to create this skirt. All right, so go ahead, do your second panel off camera, starting with your waste yarn, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to remove the waste yarn as well as measuring out our second panel, okay? So go ahead, I'll see y'all soon. Okay, y'all, so this is my second panel, and I'm going to go ahead and measure it. So it should be about, let's see here, 21 inches. Yep, and that's perfect for me because that means when my project stretches, it'll stretch to about 44 inches, which is fine, okay? So now let's remove our waist yarn, okay? So what you're going to do is get your 4.0 millimeter hook and your yarn. It'll be the same yarn you used for your skirt. For me though, I'm just taking this lavender yarn because this is what I'll create my border with, all right? But same rules still apply. So first things first, we're going to create our slip knot. Then we're going to take our panel and we're going to place our hook into that first loop on the outside, that purple yarn, so that Carry-On Cakes yarn, so the actual skirt yarn, not the waist yarn, but the skirt yarn. You're going to place your hook into that very first loop as shown, okay? Then you're going to place your yarn over top of that hook, give it a little tighten, pull that yarn through, creating a chain 1, and we're going to be working half double crochets in every purple stitch, okay? Not the cream stitches, the purple stitches, okay? So first chain 2, and then we're going to work in that very first stitch, as you see, creating our first half double crochet within that loop. Now you're just going to continue placing half double crochets in every single one of those loops like shown, okay? So go through the purple yarn just like I'm doing all the way until you reach the end, okay? You can see what loops you're going to be going in. I pulled this one out, then that one to be more specific, all right? Y'all, I'm so detail oriented, okay? But once you continue to do that all the way down, I'll meet you at the end to show you how we're going to fasten off, all right? Okay, and now we're at the very end, and I'm just going to be placing a half double crochet stitch in that last stitch, and then I'm going to put the final stitch in that last loop, just like the loop where we started, okay? So I'm going to be putting a half double crochet there as well. And then I'm going to take my scissors, give it a cut long enough so that I can weave the ends, and then pull that loop directly through, all right? And that's how we secure our piece before removing the waist yarn. So to remove the waist yarn is so easy. You're just going to take the end. Well, for me, I don't think I actually did it correctly because it wasn't coming undone as easily as I wanted to. But you're just going to pull on this yarn and it should begin to unravel, all right? And I'm going to speed this part up because mine got a little tangled, so I had to do some dissecting. But just continue to pull on your waist yarn until it unravels completely, okay? Alrighty, now we're coming to the end, and I'm just going to take my scissors and cut there, remove the last of it. And yeah, y'all, this is what it should look like. It still has a great amount of stretch, and we have our border so it'll fit around our waist nicely, okay? So now what we're going to do is take our waist yarn off our other panel and prepare to connect them. Okay, y'all, so make sure both of your panels are inside out because you know once you get done creating those slip stitches, you will have to flip your piece inside out. So make sure that both of the front panels are facing each other. Okay, y'all, so these are completely optional. I'm just going to take a couple of stitch markers and put them on both panels of the skirt to help me stay on track as I'm crocheting them together, all right? It's no right or wrong way to do this. Just make sure that you're placing them all the way until the end, okay? And then I'll show you in a couple seconds the distance that I put mine between, all right? Okay, so I placed my stitch markers all the way to the end, and this is what it looks like. If you need a couple more closer, feel free to do so. And now we're just going to slip stitch both sides, y'all. I'm going to show y'all a brief segment of how I started my slip stitches, but I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. But I just took my yarn and created a slip knot, just pretending my stitch markers are on this side. And then we're going to connect them. So I started at the very, very top of my skirt, as close to the top as I can get, inserting my hook into both of the panels, attaching my yarn, pulling my yarn through both panels, going from each side through each loop, and creating slip stitches. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing all the way down until you reach the end of your skirt on both panels. Making sure that you're staying on track and everything is measuring the same length. Okay, you're going to do this for both sides. And once you complete that, we're going to do our border and then we're finished. And you can watch my next video for the elastic, which is optional, but it does help a ton fitting around your waist. Okay, so I crocheted both panels together with my slip stitches. I turned it inside out and this is what it looks like. Right now we're looking at our border, which is what we did to remove the waste yarn. And now we're just going to create one more border before we add elastic. Elastic will be in part 2 of this video, okay? Okay, so first things first, I'm just going to insert my stitch where I connected both panels at. Take my plum yarn, create a slip knot, and I'm just going to attach this yarn to my project as before. So I'm just putting the yarn over top of the hook, pulling that yarn through that loop, chaining 1, and now I'm just going to work half double crochets on top of every stitch. And you're going to do this until you reach the very last stitch. I'll meet you at the point where we're going to join, close, and fasten off. Okay, so I have a bit of a gap here, so what I'm going to do is just place another half double crochet in that stitch in between where we're going to close at. This may not be the case for you, but it was for me. And then I'm just going to place a slip stitch right at the top of that half double crochet. And this is where we'll end it, y'all. I cut my yarn by accident, but I actually needed to keep that yarn attached because I was about to prepare for the elastic. So if you're interested in the elastic, meet me at the next video and we'll get into putting elastic in our waistband. All right, thanks so much for watching, y'all. I will see y'all in a jiffy.